Good day, sir. I am Roshanjoy Mulata Marin. This is my video presentation about reading activity number 1. Guides in photographing crime scene. Series of photograph of the crime scene. The depicted object in the photograph should not be immaterial or irrelevant. Number 2, the kinds of photographs to be taken at the scene. The photograph of the deceased showing the relationship of the dead body with the surroundings, especially the physical evidence. Photographs of evidence showing forcible entry, destroyed padlock, broken doors and windows, and other relevant signs of disturbances. Number 3. The use of special photography, such as infrared, ultraviolet, autostereoscopy, macrosphotography, photomicrography, movie, camera, etc. Photography of environs. Close-up photographs of the dead body after removal from the scene. Number 4. Sketching the crime scene. Sketch define it is the graphic representation of the scene of the crime, with complete measurements of the relative distances of relevant object and conditions obtaining therein. The general kinds of sketch. Rough sketch. It is made by the investigator of the crime scene which is full of important details but without the scale of proportion. This is used as the basis for the finished sketch. Finished sketch. This is a sketch with a scale of proportion and drawn by a draftsman. The rough sketch and finished sketch are for courtroom presentation. Number 5. The special kinds of sketches. Sketch of locality. It deals with the crime scenes in relation to the environs to include neighboring buildings, structures, or means of access leading to the scene. This kind of sketch is applied in conflagrations suspected to be arson, indicating the origin of the fire and how it spread naturally or unnaturally against the wind. Sketch of the ground. The kind of sketch which illustrates the scene of the crime with the nearest physically surroundings, such as the room adjacent or opposite the room of the crime scene. The number of the floors of a building or house, the yard, and other natural structures. Sketch and details or cross projections view or the explode view. It is described the immediate scene only, especially inside the room as the scene of the crime. The room is treated as the cardboard box where the sides and cover collapse to the same plane as the bottom. The bottom serves as the floor, the four sides representing the walls and the cover representing the ceiling. The pieces of evidence found on the floor, walls, and ceilings are depicted or drawn with respective measurements with reference points, such as bullet holes, splatters of blood, and other pertinent data. Number 6. The elements of the sketch. Measurements of space, and distance of relevant objects to their points of reference. Example, the distance of a loaded pistol to the body of the victim and the nearest wall. Points of reference must always be on 2 points to give the exact location of the object by way of the latitude and longitude. The room area must be measured by the width and length together with the height of the walls, the sides of the door, and the direction of its swing. Compass direction, a standard arrow to indicate the north direction. To find the north without compass, determine the east where the sun rises. Facing east, your left side is north direction. Essential items. All items in the scene must be included, never decided outright that some items are irrelevant. As you proceed in the investigation, these seemingly irrelevant items will become relevant or materials in their investigation. Scale of proportion. It is an elements of the finished sketch. This is not elements of the rough sketch. It is the proportion of the finished sketch to the actual size or measurements at the scene. The scale of 1 by 50 means the 1 inch in the sketch measurements is 50 inches in the actual scene measurements. Legend. This is usually placed at the bottom of sketch outside the sketch of the scene. The object of the crime scene are represented by number or letter in order not to unnecessarily crowd the graphics representation. Their descriptions are found in the legend. Example, number 3 in the sketch is explained in the legend is a pistol caliber 45 SN 1234 loaded in the chamber with 5 rounds of cartridges in the magazine. Title. This is the portion of the sketch to identify the particularly case by the name of the victim, the exact address of the scene, the date and the time of occurrence, the time of the preparations of the sketch and the name of the signature of the sketcher. Number 7. Collection, marking, tagging, and preservation of the evidence. Collection. Evidence is collected. It is individually marked with the initial of the investigator. The marking tools depends upon the nature of the evidence. If it is hard objects such as metals, the initials are scratched or engraved by the use of sharp-pointed steel, which is called stylus. Marking. Every collected evidence is marked if they are of same class of type such as 45 caliber, fired empty shells. They are marked consecutively such as RMB1, RMG2, RMG3, and so forth and so on. Evidence which by their nature could not be marked on each surface such as blood, hair, fibers are placed in the plastic container where that container is then marked. Tagging. Every piece of evidence that is collected and marked must be tagged. A card is attached by a string to the evidence which with the proper entry of identification and description together with the reference to the specific case. Preservation. Perishable materials should be preserved by the way of the methods of the preservation in order that they will reach the court in the same physical condition as when they were collected from the crime scene. This is the work of laboratory technician. Number 8, chain of custody. Define. It is the number of the persons who handled and possess the pieces of evidence, the moments that they were collected, marked, and tagged up to the time and the final disposition of the case. The basic rule is to limit the chain of custody to avoid tampering, substitution, or loss. If the evidence needs laboratory examination, the investigator must submit direct to the laboratory without delegating it to other persons. The submission of accompanied by a written request and to be officially received by the receiving officers of the laboratory, the receipt must have the legible identification of the receiver, together with his signature, time, and date of receipt. If the evidence requires No laboratory examination, if must be submitted to evidence custodian duty receipted. Number 9. Method of marking specific kinds of evidence. Guns. Revolver must be marked separately on the frame. Both cylinder, barrel, and stock for rifles. They should be marked on the barrel, frame, bolt, or slide. All magazines and accessories shall also be marked. Revolver cylinder. Aside from the mark on the cylinder, the chamber facing the firing pin must be marked as soon as it is opened for examination. A drawing must depict the chamber facing the firing pin, the respective position of the fire empty shells, misfired or dud cartridges. A detailed examination on the respective position of the evidence could make or unmake a claim of self-defense. The posterior face of the cylinder must also be depicted in a sketch to show the respective position of the smoke rings therein. Each chamber containing a fired empty shell will exhibit the smoke rings at the posterior portion of the chambers. When there is discrepancy at the investigator must look for the answer. The revolver may have been touched or tempered. The direction of the rotations of the cylinder must also be sketched. And note, Colt revolvers have clockwise directions of rotation of the cylinder. Smith and Wesson revolvers have a counterclockwise directions of cylinder rotation. Fired empty shells misfired. Cartridges. Strictly regulations say they must be marked inside the mouth in cases of the fired empty cartridges. It is nearly impossible to mark them inside the mouth, especially 22 caliber shells, but they could be marked on the side of the body of the shells, not on the base. Bullet or slugs. They can be marked on the ogive or nose, avoiding the land and groove marks. They could also be marked on the base. Reconstructing the crime. Reconstructing the crime defined it is the assessment made by the investigator after the crime scene investigation of how the crime is committed. Kinds of reconstructing the crime. Physical constructions. Reconstructing the crime is based on the physical appearance of the crime scene, mainly focused on the pieces of physical evidence and the accounts of the witnesses and suspects. Mental reconstruction. Based on the physical reconstruction, some conclusion could be formulated taking into account all available pieces of evidence. The development of theories. Theories define it is the imaginative contemplation or reality, direct intellectual apprehension, insight or body of generalization, and principles developed in association with the practice in a certain field of activity. The need of investigators' theory. If there are no witnesses to the commission of the crime, the investigator is left with the physical evidence to formulate how the crime is committed. In his formulation, he will form theories to guide his future actions. The investigator must begin with the simplest theory of how the crime was committed and by whom and what motive. He may have more than one theory depending upon the unique circumstances of every case. He will proceed in the formulation of theories from the simplest to the most complex. As the investigator progresses is the investigation and begins in the simplest theory, he will discard one by one the theory he formulated as the evidence warrants until he is focused in a simpler theory to guide him to conclude his investigation. The investigator should never disclose his theories to the press because in so doing he will open himself to unsavory cross examinations by the defense counsel when the case is finally brought before the court for trial. The investigator should not immediately jump to the most complex theory because experience proves that this is destructive. To illustrate this point, take a case of a rich man standing outside the gate of his house and a passersby shot him several times, all the bullets hitting the area of his genitals. To the ordinary investigator, he will jump immediately to the conclusion that the shooting incident is a crime of passion. Thus, he will harass the victim's no enemies, present and past associate and other persons perceived to be an enemy of the victim. He will now go to the press to publish his theory, and his action is all focused to support his theory. But in the end of the investigation, the motive of killing is just a simple trail killing, and the suspect did not by design intended to land all this bullet on the victim's genitals, but was just an accident. The investigator then is rebuffed and embraced by his own rashness. Worst, he will be cross-examined by the defense counsel about his published theory, which is very foreign to the movie. This is happening to our parents investigators. They overly expose themselves to press for nothing that is concrete. Number 12. Failed inquiry. Failed inquiry defined it is the general questioning of all persons at near or around the crime scene. When to start the failed inquiry? The moment that the investigator sets foot at the crime scene, he must immediately conduct the general questioning of all persons present, or he may assign his assistant or any member of the investigating team. Most often, the members of the Mobile Patrol Bureau who arrived at the scene earlier had already conducted the field inquiry and have in their custody the witnesses and or the suspects. The investigator should not stop her but conduct further field inquiry at the remaining people or those who will arrive at the scene. How to treat witnesses and suspects retained at the scene. The witnesses and or suspect retained at the crime scene shall be immediately transported to headquarters with the basic guidelines that they should not talk with each other during the trip and should be immediately separated with each other upon arrival in the situation. The purpose of separating the witnesses or suspect from one another, the purpose why there is need separate each witnesses from the other, and which applies also to suspect, is to preserve the independence of their respective accounts about the commission of the crime. Number 13. Going back to the crime scene. Reasons for going back to the crime scene. In some instances, crime are committed during nighttime and the investigators arrives at the scene at daytime due to late discovery or delayed report about the commissions of a crime. The investigator back to the scene at the exact time when the crime occurred in order to see for himself the order of things at that precise moment. His notes of concern shall be the lighting conditions, the distance or normal visibility, the volume of pedestrian and vehicle traffic, and other things and conditions relevant to his investigation. The reason is that during the progress of investigation, new matters may crop up which may be inadvertently considered irrelevant during the crime scene investigation, thus need to go back. Values of the process. Having first personal knowledge of this fact, he could use them to comfort lying, exaggerated, or half-truth narrations of witnesses and the admissions and confessions of suspects. These are potent tools against wayward confessions or admissions. Number 14. The three phases of criminal investigation. The identification of criminal. The criminal is traced, located, and arrested. The fact of or evidence to prove his guilt are gathered for induction during trial. 15. The four methods of identifying the criminals: by confession or admission, by account or testimonies or witnesses, by circumstantial evidence, and by associative evidence. 16. The two kinds of criminal for purposes of identification by witnesses. Known fugitives. The criminal are known by names and other personal circumstances by witnesses even before the commission of the crime. Unknown fugitives. These kinds of criminal are unknown to the witnesses by names and other personal circumstances before the commission of the crime. Although some of those criminals are identified by witnesses through their photographs in their Rugu gallery and other sources, they are classified as unknown fugitives. In some past experiences, the witnesses had identified these kinds of criminals through their photographs, yet they could not identify them in person during the police lineup. Factors affecting positive identification. The ability of witnesses to possibly identify the unknown criminals depends upon his level of alertness, intelligence, version, age, and health. The prevailing conditions of visibility and observation at the crime scene. The lapse of time between the commissions of the crime and the arrest of the offender. The opportunity of the criminal to vary his personal appearance, such as the removal of mustache, sideburns, the change of hairstyle, the additional of tattoos, and the face, earring, nose ring, rings, or facelifts through surgery. Verbal description. This is physical description of the unknown fugitive by witnesses based on the range their perception. Rogues Gallery. These are the police files of photographs of known criminals. These photographs may be taken by police or those gathered from other sources to form parts of police gallery. General photographs. The investigator should show to the witnesses a variety of photographs which does not necessarily represent the criminal in order for the witnesses to approximate the nearest descriptions of the unknown fugitive. The feature about the degree of the baldness, shape of nose, or face scars with will help the witnesses to arrive and a clear description. Cartographic sketch. It is the composite representation reduced to drawing of the suspect face made by an artist and based on the description furnished by witnesses. It is done by showing to witness a chart containing representation of different types of human features as the shape of face, nose, eyes, ears, and others. The witness then select from this chart and the artist reduce it to a drawing as a approximate facial image of the unknown criminal. Police lineup defined. It is the process of identification by witness of the unknown fugitive who is mixed with innocent persons lined before the witnesses. Procedures of police lineup. For one suspect to be mixed with innocent persons, the lineup must be at least be composed of 7 persons to 10 persons. This increase when there are 2 or more suspects mixed with innocent persons for identification. The appearance of those composing the lineup must be approximately the same as to height, belt complexion, hairstyle, clothing, etc. The witness should be instructed before entering the lineup room about the presence of the suspects. The suspects must be given the opportunity to select their positions in the lineup. The lineup members are not allowed to talk during the process or make any movements which may suggest the identify or the suspect of the suspect. The investigator should not talk or move which may directly identify the suspect. The power of suggestion should always be avoided. The proceeding must be covered by detailed report and possibly by a movie camera for court presentation. 20. Center points of physical identification. Face. Shapes require rounds, oval, rectangular, heart shapes, trapezoid, inverted trapezoid, and other appropriate descriptions such as the presence of scars, moles, birthmark, etc. Forehead, eyebrow, mustache, sideburns, eyes deep set, bulging, regularly sinky, etc. Ears regularly bulging, scope shape, shakes deep, pointed shakes, bone, round, etc. Nose, pug regularly wide, big nose, etc. Mouth small, long, round, jaw square, regular, deep, prominent, etc. Left cheek thin, tight, arch upward or downward. Teeth missing, yellowed, reddish, big, small, etc. Chin receding, protruding, etc. Hair curly, straight, short, cropped, long, few, thick, or bushy, kinky. Neck short, long, round, submerged, etc. Ang shoulder broad, regularly heavy, narrow, etc. Ang waist round, small, regularly bulging. Ang manner of dito na tayo sa physical appearance. Hispanic, American, Caucasian, Asian, Negroid. Complexion, brown, tan, light, fair, white, black, dry skin, coarse, sweaty, or other appropriate description. Number 21 na tayo. The physical evidence to identify the criminal. Kinds of physical evidence. Corpus delicti. These are the object or substances which constitute the essential part of elements of the commissions of the crime. It is sometimes called the body of the crime, not the body of the victim. The cause of death is one of the essential elements of the crime. Associative evidence. Pieces of evidence which will link the suspect to the crime scene, as fingerprint, foot or shoe expressions are some of the example. Tracing evidence. Article which assess the investigator in locating the criminal, stolen the position of the suspect is the example. Number 22. Preservation and care of evidence. Purpose. In order the evidence gathered at the crime scene shall have the same substantial conditions when they will be presented before the court during trial. Thus, care must be exercised to avoid tempering, destruction, or substitution of the physical evidence. Marking. The purpose of marking is for a purposive and defined identification during trial. The investigator is required to identify the pieces of evidence during the trial of the case. In the some instances, drug cases were dismissed due to failure of the investigator to identify where sachet of drug was the subject of drug pushing from the sachet of drugs subject to possession. 23. Modus operandi. The last one. Modus operandi defines simply. It is the method of the operation by a specific criminal or criminal syndicates. It is established by a series of crimes under one classification. The modus operandi of one criminal is distinct and different from the other. It is a criminal trademark, logo, or brand name. Examples are the use of junior-sized crowbar in residential robberies, cooking and eating at the kitchen of the victim during the robbery, leaving human excreta on the rugs of victim's house, or destroying a roof sheet to gain entry on the residence. These are but few examples. Importance of modus operandi. It is one of most useful means of identifying unknown fugitives. Thus, every investigation and unit should maintain a modus operandi file. For use of security education program of the citizenry over the radio or television programs or in seminars about safety education. That's all. Thank you.